All right, welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. You ready to unpack some serious creative energy? We're going all in on Taylor Swift today. Specifically, we're looking at that really fascinating turn she took, her pivot to indie folk with Folklore and Evermore. And of course, we can't ignore that whole power move of re-recording her masters. So yeah, buckle up, because this is going way beyond just catchy tunes. We're talking about an artist who took control, really took control.
Yeah, it's incredible. I think what has always struck me about Taylor Swift is how she can completely reinvent herself, but still hold on to her core identity. It's not just about a new genre, it's a full-on declaration of independence, and that's what we're going to trace today, right from the beginning.
Exactly, and we've got a ton of material to work with. We've got biographies, documentaries, even these old YouTube interviews we dug up, the whole shebang. And to be honest, even before we get to that indie folk phase, there were already signs of this independent spirit brewing. Like, remember when she walked away from a major label deal at 15? 15. All because they wouldn't let her write her own music.
It's crazy, right? Like Taylor Swift, Dare to Dream lays out, that's exactly how it went down. Most teenagers would jump at that kind of opportunity. But even then, she knew her own voice, her writing, that was non-negotiable.
It really makes you think, what if she'd taken that deal? Would we even know Taylor Swift as we do today? But that self-awareness, even back then, it's mind-blowing.
And you can draw a straight line from that to the re-recordings, the indie collaborations. It was always about artistic ownership.
Okay, so let's rewind a bit, back to those early country days. Kelly Spence's research really highlights how much her lyrics resonated with younger audiences. She was singing about their lives, the stuff they were dealing with, heartbreak, friend drama, all that. And bam, instant connection.
It's true. And Taylor Swift, A Life in Music, points out how often her personal life was reflected in her songwriting. So fans felt like they were growing up with her. And that built this fiercely loyal following.
It's more than just being an artist. It's like she was a friend, someone who understood. But then she makes this move to a pop country blend. And then full-on pop. I mean, Fearless was huge. That tour was so theatrical. And then 1989 just explodes. Did she lose that connection with fans during that shift?
Not at all. If anything, I think it got even stronger. Think about the 1989 Secret Sessions. She invited fans to her own home for these private listening parties before the album dropped. That's just next-level fan engagement.
Yeah, it's about building a personal connection, building excitement. She was a social media pioneer before that was even a thing.
Oh, absolutely. And musically, she never abandoned that core storytelling element. Even Love Story, You Belong With Me. Sure, they're pop hits, but they've got that country heart, that narrative drive that she's known for.
It's like she was bridging these two worlds, bringing those country fans along for the pop evolution. But even with all the success, all the awards, something wasn't right behind the scenes, was it?
No, and that's where we get into the whole controversy about the master recordings. Because when she left Big Machine Records in 2018, she didn't own those early albums, the foundation of her career, basically. And according to Taylor Swift, the Brightest Star 2024, that sparked a massive battle for control.
It's wild, right? It's like baking this amazing cake and then someone else gets to decide who eats it. It makes sense why she felt so strongly about it.
Exactly. And Taylor Swift, in her own words, digs into this idea of artistic ownership, especially in the digital age. Like, how much control should an artist have over their work, especially when it comes to how it's used and who's profiting from it?
It's a huge question for musicians these days. But Taylor, she didn't just complain. She took action. And those re-recordings, that was a bold move.
Bold and genius. Re-recording those first 6 albums, that was her way of reclaiming her narrative, her art, her story. It was a statement, not just for herself, but for every artist in a similar situation.
And it worked. Fans rallied behind her. The albums topped the charts again. It sent a message to the whole industry. You can't just assume ownership. You have to earn it. You have to respect the artist.
What's really interesting is that Kelly Clarkson, another artist who's dealt with similar issues, she actually suggested the re-recording idea to Taylor in a tweet. It shows the sense of community, artists supporting each other, pushing for change together.
It's inspiring, right? And all of this, the re-recordings, the fight for ownership, it sets the stage for what I think is one of her most creative periods, Folklore and Evermore.
Absolutely. This is where we see Taylor Swift step into a whole new realm, embracing indie folk, working with artists outside her usual circle. But before we jump into all that, I think we need to unpack what exactly went down with those master recordings. So yeah, when Taylor left Big Machine, she didn't actually own the master recordings of her first 6 albums. and Taylor Swift. A Life in Music really does a good job of breaking down why that's such a big deal. These masters, they're like the original blueprints for a song.
I get that. But I think a lot of people, maybe they don't understand what that means practically. Like, okay, someone else owns them, but so what? What does that actually change?
Well, think about it this way. It's not just about who gets to put the song on, say, a Spotify playlist. Owning the master, that means you have control over all the rights to that original recording. So you decide who can use it, maybe for a movie, a commercial, you name it. You decide how it's distributed, and you collect all those royalties.
Ah, okay. So it's not just about creative control, it's about the money, too. It makes a lot more sense why she'd fight to get those back.
Yeah, exactly. And this is where it gets complicated, right? Because in 2019, Sigurdur Braun, he's a music executive, he bought Big Machine Records, and with it, he got Taylor's masters. And that just blew up. It became this huge controversy. I mean, she had publicly criticized him and his practices before this whole thing.
Oh, yeah, there was definitely some drama there.
Yeah.
Didn't some reports say that she wasn't even given a real chance to buy them back before he swooped in? I feel like it was all over social media.
Yeah, it was everywhere. And this whole situation, it put a spotlight on how power works in the music industry, especially the leverage that record labels have. They can really pressure young artists, especially when they're just starting out.
It becomes bigger than just Taylor then, right? This is about how artists are treated in general, their rights and, whether these contracts are even fair.
100%. I think it was a wake-up call for a lot of musicians. But Taylor, she didn't just sit back and accept it, she fought back. And that's where we get the re-recordings. Talk about a power move.
Yeah, what a way to take back control of the narrative. Going back into the studio, recreating those albums. That must have been intense.
I'm sure it was, but it was also incredibly strategic. Taylor Swift, in her own words, even mentions that she saw this as a way to connect with her fans on a deeper level. They could choose to support her version of the songs, not the ones controlled by someone else.
And it worked, too. The Brightest Star 2024 said those re-recordings were massive successes. Like they topped the charts all over again. Yeah. It showed that the fans were with her on this.
Absolutely. It sent this message to the industry. This wasn't just about one artist and her complaints. This was about shifting the balance of power. And it leads us perfectly into Folklore and Evermore. It's like all of these experiences, all these battles, they fuel this completely new creative direction.
Okay, but hold on for a second. Before we get into those albums, I have to ask, you're deep in the music world, this whole master recordings thing. Is that common? Do a lot of artists just not own their early work?
It's more common than you think, unfortunately, especially in the past. Those record deals, they were structured really differently. Artists often signed away these rights without even realizing it, and they didn't think about the long-term consequences.
So it really was bigger than Taylor. This fight, it was for future artists, too. Yeah. To make them aware of this whole thing. Right?
Exactly. She brought this issue into the open, made people think about it. That's huge.
Okay, so then we get to Folklore and Evermore. This is where she goes in a completely different direction musically, right? Indie folk, working with Aaron Dessner from The National. I mean, no one saw that coming.
It was a surprise, for sure. And Miss Americana, the documentary, gives us a glimpse into what she was going through at the time. She was feeling burned out by the whole pop machine, all that constant scrutiny. She needed a creative reset to explore new themes without the pressure of being Taylor Swift.
But Folklore and Evermore, it was like this chance to exhale, this chance to just experiment.
Exactly. And you can hear it in the music. No more big pop hooks. It's all about these really intricate narratives. Quieter songs, more reflective. It's a big shift, but it's still totally her, That storytelling ability, it's still front and center.
But the stories themselves, they're different, right? Less about her personal life and more fictional.
You got it. Folklore especially, it's full of these fictional narratives, like a bunch of interconnected characters or stories woven across different songs. It's like this whole new world for fans to get lost in.
And then Evermore comes along. It's almost like a sister album. Just deepening those stories, those themes. Yeah. Releasing 2 albums like that back to back. That was a bold move.
It really was. But it worked. The critics loved them. Fans embraced them. It cemented this image of Taylor Swift as someone who follows her own creative path, no matter what.
Okay, so we've got the re-recordings, this whole fight for ownership, and then this exploration of indie folk. But what does it all mean? If someone's listening to this, trying to understand where Taylor Swift fits in the music world, what's the takeaway?
Well, on the surface, it's easy to see her as this insanely successful pop star, someone who's always at the top of the charts. But what's really interesting is what's going on beneath all of that.
Like what's driving her choices, her evolution.
Exactly. This is an artist who is always fighting for creative control, who's willing to walk away from deals, to re-record her entire catalog, to experiment with new sounds, all to maintain control of her art, her story.
So it's less about the genre she's making and more about the why. This need to be in the driver's seat.
That's it. And that's a message that goes way beyond the music industry. This is about taking control of your own narrative, your own creative output, your career, whatever that looks like for you.
I love that. Okay, so we talked about the master recordings, the artistic shifts, but there's one more thing I have to ask about. The surprise releases. Dropping Folklore and Evermore with no warning. That was such a Taylor Swift move.
Oh yeah, classic Taylor. The Brightest Star 2024 called it a masterclass in how to defy industry norms. And she did it again with the re-recordings too.
It creates this buzz, this frenzy. And honestly, it feels like a gift to the fans, this unexpected treat.
It also lets her control the whole narrative. No leaks, no hype built up at the label. She sets the terms.
It's so smart. Okay, I think we've covered a lot here. Let's see if we can sum it up. We know her music has evolved from country to pop to indie folk. We know she fought for ownership, re-recorded her early albums. But what does all of that tell us about her as an artist?
Well, to me, it says that Taylor Swift is not just a musician. She's a force of nature. She's always evolving, always challenging herself in the industry, pushing boundaries, creatively and in terms of her business.
It's like she's setting a new standard for what it means to be a successful artist today.
Yeah.
It's not just about the hits. It's about ownership, creative control, connecting with fans on your own terms.
I agree. She's writing her own rules.
Yeah.
And that's incredibly inspiring.
It really is. I want to go deeper into Folklore and Evermore. What were the musical and lyrical changes that made these albums stand out? What were the critics saying?
Well, let's start with Folklore. It was a big departure from her earlier pop sound, this raw, more intimate feeling. Acoustic instruments, layered harmonies, that kind of thing.
I remember feeling like it was so different, but in a good way. Like a totally different side of her.
Exactly. And Taylor Swift, in her own words, talks about her collaboration with Aaron Dessner from The National, a band known for that atmospheric indie sound. He brought this whole new dimension to her music, helped her create these amazing soundscapes.
It was such a good pairing. You could hear his influence, but it still sounded like a Taylor Swift album. What about the lyrics? Those were different too, right?
The lyrics on Folklore are some of her most poetic, most introspective work. She's exploring these themes of love, loss, memory, nostalgia, with this haunting beauty.
It felt like she was coming from a different place, like channeling characters instead of just telling her own story.
And that's exactly what she did. She built these fictional narratives, stories about love triangles, missed connections, secrets. Cardigan is a perfect example.
Oh, Cardigan, that song gets me every time. It's heartbreaking the way she uses imagery, metaphors. It's like a whole world.
Exactly. It's like you're stepping into a novel or a film. And then there's The Last Great American Dynasty. That one tells the story of Rebecca Harkness, the woman who owned Taylor's Rhode Island mansion before her.
Wow, I had no idea. So she's taking inspiration from history and weaving it into these fictional stories? That's fascinating.
It is. And the critics, they loved Folklore. They praised her songwriting, her vulnerability, her willingness to try new things. It even won Album of the Year at the Grammys. So yeah, critically and commercially, it was a huge success.
Okay, so Folklore was this big shift, this artistic exploration. What about Evermore? Did she keep going in that direction, or did she change things up again?
It's more like a continuation of what she started with, Folklore. It expands on the themes, the fictional world she created, but it also has its own distinct mood, its own atmosphere.
So more like a companion piece than a sequel.
Exactly. Evermore has this darker, moodier feeling than Folklore. This sense of melancholy that runs through a lot of the songs.
I remember that. Songs like Tolerate It and Champagne Problems, they're just gut-wrenching.
Yeah, they are. And then you have songs like No Body, No Crime, like a full-on murder mystery ballad. It shows that she's not afraid to play with different genres, different ways of telling a story.
She definitely went to some dark places with that one. Did Evermore get the same critical acclaim as Folklore?
It did really well, though it didn't win Album of the Year. But the critics still loved it. They praised its ambition, the depth of the lyrics, the storytelling.
So both albums were big wins for her, both creatively and with the fans. But I'm curious, did these albums sell as well as her pop albums? Did she lose any fans because of the change in sound?
Surprisingly, no. Both Folklore and Evermore were huge commercial successes. It showed that her fans were willing to go with her on this journey.
Wow, so she actually managed to grow her audience without losing the people who were already there.
Precisely. And that says a lot about her talent, her authenticity, how she connects with people, but it also points to a larger trend in music.
What do you mean?
I think we're seeing more artists blurring the genre lines. They're experimenting with sound, they're refusing to be put in a box, and the fans are responding to that.
So Taylor's not just leading the way when it comes to artistic ownership, she's also pushing the boundaries of what popular music can be.
Exactly. And that's exciting. It opens up all these possibilities for artists. They can explore their creativity without feeling limited by what genre they're supposed to be making.
And for fans, it means we get to experience music in new ways, in ways we didn't expect.
That's it. And I think that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, it's like a whole new era. But,
Yeah.
even with all these changes, all the genre bending, there's still something that ties all of her music together. I think it's the songwriting.
Absolutely. No matter what kind of sound she's going for, it's those lyrics, those stories. That's what really connects with people. Taylor Swift, in her own words, calls it a direct line to the heart. And that's a perfect way to put it.
It's true. It's like she has this ability to tap into those universal feelings, heartbreak, joy, longing. We've all been there, right?
Yeah.
And she just finds the words to say it perfectly.
For sure. And she's not afraid to be specific, to use those little details that make it all feel so real, so relatable. Remember that line from All Too Well about the scarf left at her sister's house? It's like a punch in the gut because we can all picture it. That lost item, that reminder of a past love.
Oh, don't even get me started on that song. I feel that one deep.
Yeah.
But it's not just the heartbreak stuff either. Even in her happier songs, the more playful ones, there's always this vulnerability, this honesty that makes her so relatable.
Yeah, and that willingness to be vulnerable, to share her own experiences, even the painful ones. I think that's what sets her apart. It's like she's saying, hey, I've been through it too, you're not alone. And that creates this connection with her fans.
It's like she's giving us permission to feel those things,
Yeah.
to embrace those emotions, to own our stories, even the messy parts. But it's amazing how her songwriting has grown along with her sound. It's not just the same lyrics over different beats.
Exactly. If you compare her early country stuff to Folklore and Evermore, the growth is obvious. It's more mature, more nuanced. The storytelling is so much more complex. She's not just telling stories anymore, she's building whole worlds.
Yeah, like you said before, it's like stepping into a novel or a movie. There are layers to unpack, characters to think about.
And that evolution is inspiring, you know? It shows you that you don't have to stay in one lane creatively. You can grow, experiment, push yourself. It makes you wonder, what kind of stories will she tell next? What sounds will she explore?
Right, I can't wait to see what she does next. Okay, so we've talked about her music, her business decisions, her impact on the whole industry. What do you think? What's the legacy of Taylor Swift? How will she be remembered?
That's the big question, isn't it? I mean, she's still writing her story, but her influence is huge. Musically, she's redefined what it means to be a pop star in the 21st century.
Breaking free from those old label restrictions, taking control of her own narrative.
Right, and that's had this ripple effect. You see more artists demanding ownership, trying new release strategies, connecting directly with fans online. She's changed the game.
And there's the message she sends, not just to musicians, but to anyone who's creative, this idea that you can fight for your vision, that you don't have to compromise your art.
She's a role model, an inspiration, especially for young women. She shows them that you can be successful on your own terms, that you can use your voice to speak your truth, to challenge things, to build a career that reflects your values.
That's powerful. But I think what's most amazing is how she's done all of this while staying connected to her fans.
That's huge, isn't it? She hasn't left behind the people who were there from the beginning. They've been on this journey with her through all the changes.
And they've helped her succeed at every step. It's this amazing cycle of creativity, support, and respect.
It's rare to see that level of connection, that kind of longevity.
It really is. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you hope listeners take away from Taylor Swift's story?
That's a good question. I think it's the power of creative independence. Taylor's story is a reminder that we all have a voice, a unique perspective, and we have the right to express ourselves authentically. Whether you're a musician, a writer, an artist, an entrepreneur, whatever, don't be afraid to challenge things, to experiment, to fight for what you believe in.
I love that. And what's so exciting is that her story's not over. Who knows what she'll do next, what boundaries she'll break, what new heights she'll reach.
It's hard to say. But one thing's for sure, Taylor Swift is going to keep being a force to be reckoned with, a voice for creative freedom and inspiration to us all.
Couldn't have said it better myself. That's Taylor Swift for you, a true icon of independence. And that wraps up our deep dive for today. But before we go, we want to hear from you. What stuck with you about Taylor's journey? What questions came up for you? Share your thoughts on our website or social media. We love hearing from you. And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
Awesome.